One of the things that I take pride on is that when I report on entertainment news, I often make sure to separate my personal sentiments about a story versus the actual facts. For example, in July, when I was the first to report that James Gunn's Superman was a box office flop, and in August, when I was the first to report that James Gunn had effectively been demoted at Warner Brothers, my reports were based on extensive research and evidence that supported them. In contrast, in recent months when there was more and more talk of Zack Snyder's possible return to restore the Snyderverse, I was much more reserved in how I had reported on it because the way I saw it, it was far from a done deal, and amidst a very competitive ongoing bidding war over the purchase of Warner Brothers, the future of DC, James Gunn, and Zack Snyder have all been and still are very much up in the air. Now initially, when Paramount was considered the frontrunner contender in buying Warner Brothers, due to their relationship with Donald Trump and Zack Snyder's relationship with the Saudis, who were reportedly investors in the deal, Snyder did gain some real momentum. That's the reason why we saw him rally his fanbase online and generate a real buzz surrounding his DCEU. And while I was always happy to give you updates on all of this, I never promised or guaranteed that Snyder was returning because there was just too much uncertainty. If you recall, the most I could give him is that I said at one point that I thought that Zack Snyder had a 60% chance to return, and I think that with Paramount leading the bidding war at that moment, it was a fair assessment. But as it turned out, it was actually Netflix's offer that ended up being accepted by Warner Brothers, which means that this entire situation has become even more complicated, and based on things that are happening now, it could still change at any moment. As I've mentioned in my previous video, Warner Brothers CEO David Zaslav may prefer Netflix's offer, but due to the power and dominance Netflix has within the market, it would have to go through a lot of hurdles to overcome when it comes to regulators, when it comes to government approval, and sometimes these things can get caught up in courts for years, which means we could theoretically see Zaslav continue to run Warner Brothers as he sees fit for a long time as all of this gets sorted and possibly even rejected by courts. Another option we're likely to see, which I've also mentioned in the past, is that Paramount themselves could try to do something of a hostile takeover by directly appealing to shareholders and investors that may not feel like waiting for years to see if and when the Netflix deal ever gets approved, when they know that Trump himself isn't a fan of it and that Zaslav likely chose Netflix in order to personally pocket some more money on the deal without really considering how this would affect anybody else. So in a case like this, sometimes the investors and the shareholders would just say, wait, why don't we just take a Paramount deal that's simple and could get approved quickly instead of dragging this out for years. And just to be clear, even without Trump's support, which is certainly helpful, the Ellisons and Paramount can much more easily get a deal like this approved by regulators because, unlike Netflix, they're not currently the number one streamer in the marketplace, so it's not really an antitrust monopoly issue. And in addition, Paramount are experienced in theatrical releases, which is something that Netflix has historically not cared about at all. And if Netflix just wants to buy Warner Brothers to take over some IPs and expand their catalog of movies and shows while simultaneously running the theatrical side of Warner Brothers straight into the ground without giving it a second thought, this could cause major damage within the entertainment industry and to movie theaters everywhere. So honestly, I don't think we've seen the last word about this deal from Paramount, but I do think that this is going to be a big headache now for everybody involved, and while I'm not happy to say this, I think that there is one person that has greatly benefited from the Netflix offer being accepted, and that's James Gunn. Now, let me be clear, regardless of Netflix, regardless of any kind of company sale, I think that internally at Warner Brothers, James Gunn is not all that well regarded there these days. If he was, they would have renewed his contract because they renewed contracts of other key executives like Mike DeLuca and Pam Abdi. But with the contract ending at the end of 2026 and a deal that could get delayed for years in court, if Paramount aren't able to stop this quickly, Gunn just may have bought himself some time, which is really all that he needed. Because if there was a chance that Paramount would prefer to expedite Gunn's departure upon taking control of Warner Brothers, now he's not necessarily feeling that same kind of pressure. And not only that, even within the Netflix-Warner Brothers deal that they both agreed upon, it's been decided that Netflix would only take control of Warner Brothers in late 2026. So unless Gunn were to do something outrageous, in this transitional period, Zaslav completely getting rid of Gunn right now would be more trouble than it's worth, especially if he has to break a contract with him. And later, even if somehow this Netflix agreement gets approved, and they do eventually take control and decide not to renew Gunn's contract, project, Gunn can then spin a narrative and say, well, you know, when I signed on board here, it was Warner Brothers, now it's Netflix. The creative goals here are different now than when I joined, and that's why we've amicably decided to part ways, or some nonsense like that, just so that he can save face. As for Gunn's projects, I've always maintained that Supergirl, Lanterns, and Clayface were always going to get released as planned, no matter who took over Warner Brothers and when. The only thing I'm still 50-50 on is the Man of Tomorrow movie, which seemed like it was hastily announced, and if for some reason it ended up being cancelled, I wouldn't be shocked, but at the same time, it could very well be James Gunn's final DCU project, unless, let's say, Supergirl makes $1 billion at the box office, which is kind of unlikely based on the trailer description that we've seen leak out of that CCXP convention in Brazil this week. And I know what you're probably thinking. Well, where does this leave Zack Snyder? Now, we know that Zack Snyder had a relationship with Netflix, but recently they seem to have parted ways on a few projects that were in discussion. And while I believe that Snyder's movies for Netflix did get views on their platform, based on the money they had spent, I think Netflix really wanted Rebel Moon to be a big household name franchise that they could capitalize on. Now, whether you like those movies or not, I don't think they delivered exactly what Netflix was expecting. I guess what I'm saying is that I don't think Netflix and Snyder hate each other, and if Netflix ever thought that they could make money doing a DC project with Snyder, they could possibly go for it. But for Snyder, I think that the Paramount deal was much more favorable, and if James Gunn is feeling relieved today, I'm not sure Zack Snyder is as happy right now. With that being said, I always make sure to point out that Snyder should never be underestimated, and we still don't know what's going to happen with Paramount and how they're going to deal with this Netflix situation. And regardless of anything that happens, the mainstream media has absolutely noticed the unprecedented support that Snyder has received recently, not only from his fan base, but also from people that were ambivalent about him, or just really dislike Gunn's DCU versus his DCEU. At the end of the day, though, no matter who takes control over at Warner Brothers in DC, Snyder's popularity could still one day pave a way for his return in some capacity, in some kind of format. The only catch is, the cast of the DCU isn't exactly getting younger, and if there was any kind of revival, it would really have to take place sooner rather than later. So, as opposed to Gunn, who only wants to buy time, Snyder is in the opposite boat. I think that he has less time to spare. But if you appreciate the kind of balanced reporting I do on this channel, and you want me to continue to keep you posted with all the latest developments, please make sure to like and subscribe, as it would really support an independent news reporter like myself. Thanks for watching, my friends. Thank you, and good day.
I am such an awesome guy. I make so many videos.